One might reasonably argue that Elska had no business being called a queen, mateless, motherless, and up to both elbows in kennel mud on the coldest morning of the year. But then, if the Thornfell pack had ever once treated her as anything better than mud, she'd never have been standing ankle-deep in it when the king came down out of the hills. And if that king had learned to keep his royal opinions behind his teeth, the way kings were generally advised to, he'd never have swung down off a very fine horse to kneel in it beside her. So when one followed the whole disaster back to its root, as Elska would later have a great deal of idle time to do, it turned out to be everyone's fault but hers, which was, as it happened, the first time in the whole of her life that a thing had not been. The morning had begun the way the worst mornings always did in Thornfell, with a bell and a rite. This one was the bearing, the pack's yearly accounting of its unmated, when every wolf come of age was made to stand in the muster yard and let the elders read the mate scent off their skin aloud. A bonded wolf carried it plain, a second thread woven under their own, the promise of the one the moon had cut them for. The elders would call it, and the yard would cheer, and two young fools would go red and find each other in the crowd. And it was all, Elska supposed, very moving if you were the sort of person the moon bothered to remember. The moon had never once bothered to remember Elska. 3 bearings now. She had stood in that yard and let old Sedwin press 2 fingers to the pulse at her throat and breathe her in, and 3 times his face had done the same thing. The small sour pinch, as though he'd bitten into fruit and found it hollow. Nothing, he'd say, and the word would carry. Nothing under her own scent. No thread, no promise, no mate walking the earth with her name stitched into him. A null, mateless. Which in Thornfell was not a misfortune to be pitied but a rot to be named, because a wolf the moon would not claim was a wolf that had done something, somewhere, to deserve it. So they gave her the hounds. It was fitting. Everyone agreed. Let the unclaimed thing tend the unclaimed things. Elska had spent 6 winters in the kennels below the muster yard, sleeping warm among 40 hunting hounds because no hearth in the village would have her, and she had learned in that time that she preferred them to most of the pack anyway. Hounds did not care what the moon thought of you. A hound cared whether your hands were kind and your voice was steady, and Elska's were both. And so she was, in the one corner of the world that measured her. Rich, beyond counting. The pup was the reason she'd come at all. She'd have skipped the rite entirely. She was permitted that much. A null being beneath even the obligation to be shamed. But the runt of the autumn litter had taken a chill in the night and needed to be kept against a body warmer than the straw. And there was no one in Thornfell who would carry a null's sick dog for her. So she'd wrapped him in her own coat, tucked him under her arm where his small fevered heart ticked against her ribs, and come to stand at the very back of the yard on the theory that a woman holding a puppy was too pathetic even for Ordric to bother with. It was, she would reflect, a rare and impressive failure of judgment. She had hoped, this morning, to be forgotten. She had come late and stood at the back with mud to her knees and the pup wrapped warm against her. And for a while, it had worked. Then Alpha Ordric found her with his eyes. He did it, she understood, because there were strangers watching. A party of riders had come down the hill road at first light, cloaked, well-horsed, the sort of quiet wealth that did not announce itself, and reined up at the yard's edge to watch the rite the way travelers watch anything free. Ordric of Thornfell was a man who could not bear to be seen being ordinary in front of his betters. He needed to show them he ran a tight, clean pack. And a tight, clean pack did not leave its rot standing quietly at the back. "You," he called, and the yard turned. "Kennel girl, come and be red with the rest." I was red, Alpha. She kept her voice flat and low, the voice she used on a spooked animal. 3 years running. You know what I am. I want our guests to know. His smile was for the riders, not for her. Come. Let them see how honest Thornfell is about its own. There was no walking away from an alpha's call. She set the pup down gentle in the straw, and she walked out into the middle of the yard, and old Sedwin laid his 2 fingers on her throat, and every soul in Thornfell already knew what he would say, and waited to enjoy her hearing it. "Nothing," Sedwin said. The yard breathed the word back at her, warm and pleased. Somebody laughed, and Ordric, playing to the hooded strangers at his gate, spread his hands as if presenting a lesson. "Mateless," he announced, 3 years bared and not a thread to her. "You'll forgive us the sight of her, friends. Every pack keeps a little trash it can't burn. Down, girl. On your knees where the moon left you, and we'll get on to the wolves that matter." And here, Elska knew, was the part where she was meant to kneel. She had knelt before. Kneeling cost nothing and ended it quickest, and a clever Null learned to spend her pride carefully, because she had so little and no way to earn more. But she was tired. She was tired in a way that had been building for 6 winters in the cold under the yard, and there was a sick pup shivering in the straw who'd done nothing to deserve the moon's opinion either, and something in Elska that she generally kept muzzled slipped its collar. She did not kneel. She lifted her chin, and she looked Ordric of Thornfell dead in his handsome, performing face, and into the waiting quiet of the yard she said, clear enough to carry to the gate, "The moon didn't leave me anywhere, Alpha. It looked at this pack, and at what it makes of the wolves it's given, and it decided not to hand you one more." The yard went silent as a held breath, and at the gate, unhurried, one of the hooded riders swung a leg over his saddle and stepped down into the mud. Afterward, Elska could never make the next moment sit in the right order. She remembered them the way you remember a fall. Out of sequence, too bright, each piece landing a beat before the one that should have come first. She remembered the rider crossing the yard. Not fast. That was the thing she kept returning to. Every wolf in Thornfell had gone stiff and wrong-footed, the way a room goes when it senses a predator it hasn't placed yet, and the man walked through all of it, unbothered, boots sinking to the ankle in the muck the pack had been so proud of shoving her into. She remembered Ordric's face beginning to change, the performing smile hardening, then souring, then draining altogether as the rider reached up and pushed back his hood. She did not know the face, and then, horribly, she did. Not from meeting it. A kennel girl from a hill pack did not meet the men on the coins, but from the coins themselves, and from the great seal pressed into every writ that came down from Hymir, and from the way, once, a traveling player had painted him for a summer festival and got the jaw right and everything else wrong. The players had missed the stillness of him. The pale, patient eyes that had already finished looking at a thing while you were only starting to. The mouth that seemed to be deciding whether the whole world was worth the trouble of a smile. Behind her, someone made a sound like a kettle. It was Sedwin. He had gone down so fast his knees cracked on the stone. "Your Majesty," he whispered, and the word went through the yard like cold water, and 40 wolves who had just been laughing folded to the ground. Corvin, Alpha King of the 7 Packlands, holder of the Hollow Throne, to whom Ordric of Thornfell bent his knee 3 times a year and sent his tithe and his oaths. Corvin, who was standing in the Thornfell muster yard in the mud they'd made her kneel in, and who had not, Elska noticed with the strange floating clarity of the truly doomed, knelt to anyone at all. Instead he looked at her. "Say it again," the king said. Elska's mouth had gone to sand. Every scrap of the pride that had slipped its collar came slinking back now, tail down, because it was one thing to insult Ordric of Thornfell, and quite another to have done it at the gate of the man who could unmake Ordric of Thornfell with a sentence. She had not insulted the king, but she had made a scene at his feet, and kings did not love a scene. "Your Majesty," she managed. "I spoke out of turn. I'll take whatever—" "You'll take nothing yet. You haven't earned anything yet." He came closer. Up near, the size of him registered. Not tall so much as certain. a wolf built along lines that had never in his life needed to raise his voice. You said the moon looked at this pack, and at what it makes of its own, and chose to hand it nothing. Did you mean it? Or was it only a good thing to say? Behind him, the woman with the captain's bearing had gone very still, watching Elska the way a swordsman watches a stranger's hands. Whatever this was, it mattered to them. That frightened Elska more than the kneeling had. I meant it, she said, before the wiser parts of her could stop her. Something moved behind the king's eyes. Not anger. She had braced for anger and could have withstood it. This was worse. This was interest, sudden and total. The interest of a man who has been hunting a very particular thing across a very long distance and has just seen it break cover. And then Corvin, Alpha King of the 7 Packlands, went down on one knee in the Thornfell mud in front of his sworn Alpha and his cowering pack, and took Elska's mud-caked, kennel-rough hand in both of his and looked up at her the way no one in the whole of her life had ever once looked at her. Then you're wasted here, he said. Come and be my queen instead. The words did not seem to belong in the yard. They sat in the cold air, absurd, enormous, and refused to be taken back. The yard did not breathe. Elska did not breathe. Somewhere off past the pens a hound howled once, confused, and no one hushed it. Get up, she said. It came out a whisper. Your Majesty, get up, you can't, people are... Get up. No. He did not get up. Not until you answer. I find I quite like the mud, actually. His mouth curved. It's honest. There's precious little of that where I'm going. Tell me your name. Elska, she said, because a king had asked, and you answered a king. Elska. He said it as if he were testing whether it would bear weight. Apparently it would. Marry me, Elska of Nowhere. I dare you. And the terrible, unforgivable, entirely traitorous truth, the one she would spend a great many nights refusing to admit she'd had, was that for one whole heartbeat, kneeling there in the ruin of the worst morning of her life, she wanted to say yes. She was, of course, far too clever for that. Which was exactly the trouble. Because a clever woman knew that no king crossed 7 Packlands to kneel in the mud of a nothing hill pack and propose to its kennel girl for no reason at all. He had a reason. She could not see it. And the not seeing of it was, she would come to understand, the most dangerous thing that had ever happened to her. She did not, as it turned out, get the chance to answer him, because that was the moment Ordric found his voice. Your Majesty, I must protest. The girl is null. She's not fit to... And the king rose out of the mud in one unhurried motion and turned on him a look so mild that Ordric's protest died in his throat like a snuffed candle. Fit, Corvin repeated pleasantly, as if turning the word over for flaws. We'll discuss what's fit, you and I, at length, later. And Ordric, who had made Elska kneel in front of his whole pack not an hour before, went the gray of old ash. Whatever else happened, Elska thought distantly, she would remember that color for the rest of her life. Then the king's people were moving, cloaks and quiet efficiency, a woman with a captain's bearing murmuring orders. And somewhere in the swirl of it, Elska was walked. Not ungently, out of the yard and into the tack room off the kennels, the one warm place she owned, and left there to shake. She was not drunk. That was the thing she kept coming back to, sitting on the feed bin with her hands pressed between her knees to still them. She had no wine to blame, no golden warm fog to hide behind. She had been stone sober and clear-eyed, and she had looked a king in the face and told him the truth. And he had knelt in the mud and called her his queen, and none of it, made the smallest particle of sense. So? The door eased open. You've had an interesting morning. Marin. The relief of her was almost enough to undo the last thread of Elska's composure. In 6 winters of Thornfell teaching her exactly what she was worth, Marin had been the single soul who'd decided otherwise, Maren of the miller's family, 2 years older, who had found a 12-year-old Null crying in the kennels and simply sat down in the straw beside her and stayed. Who brought her bread when the hearths wouldn't. Who called the pack's cruelty by its name so Elska didn't have to wonder if she was imagining it. If Elska had a person in the world, she had exactly one. And Maren was standing in the doorway with her arms folded and her clever eyes bright with something that wasn't quite a smile. "Interesting," Elska said, "is a word for it. He knelt to you." Maren came and sat, the way she always had, close enough that their shoulders touched. In front of Ordric, in front of everyone. "Do you have the faintest idea what you've done?" "I didn't do anything. I insulted my alpha and a king happened to be watching. That's not a doing, that's an accident. He'll ride off by nightfall and forget the whole." "He's not riding off." Marin's voice had gone careful. "That's what I came to tell you, before someone worse does. His escort's requisitioning the whole east barn. They've sent a rider back to Hymir. Elska." She took her hand, mud and all. "He means it. Whatever it is, whatever he's playing at, he means to take you back with him." Something cold turned over in Elska's chest. "Why would he?" "Look at me. I'm a Null and a kennel girl, and I smell of 40 dogs. Kings don't. Men like that don't just—" She stopped, because Morin was watching her with an expression she couldn't read, and the not reading of it plucked at some instinct she'd honed on 6 winters of the hounds. "What?" she said. "You know something. You've got that face." For just a breath, Marin hesitated. "There's been talk on the roads," she said at last, low. "Nothing you'd hear, buried up here in the kennels. But the packmen coming through from Hymir this past year. Elska, they say the king can't keep a season without someone trying to kill him. Poison, mostly. 3 times, some say. Others say more, and that the throne's rotten with wolves who'd like him gone and can't be caught at it because—" She chose the word. "Because you can't smell a lie the way you can smell an enemy. Not anymore. Not since the bonds started going wrong." "The bonds," Elska said slowly. "I don't understand it, and neither do they. Only that something's loose in the high packs that shouldn't be, and a man who kneels to a mateless girl in a mudyard is a man who's run clean out of ordinary answers." Marin's grip tightened. "So you listen to me. You be careful up there, and you trust nobody. And if it goes bad, you send word and I will come. Do you hear me? I don't care whose queen he calls you. You're mine first." Elska held on to her friend's hand in the warm dark of the only room she'd ever owned, and felt, for the first time all morning, that the ground was steady under her. She would think of this moment often, later, of exactly how steady it had felt. On the day she learned it was the single most dangerous lie anyone had ever told her. Outside, a horn sounded from the yard, 1 long note, then 2 short. A summons in the old road code that even a kennel girl knew. The escort was ready. Somewhere beyond the door, 40 wolves who had watched her kneel that morning now waited, silent, to watch her ride away a queen. They had come for the Null of Thornfell. They had come, God's help them all, for her. Hymir was not a place so much as a proof. It stood where 3 rivers met, terrace on terrace of pale stone climbing the shoulder of the mountain until the topmost hall seemed to lean against the sky, and every inch of it had been built to say the same thing to anyone who came up the road. "Here is a thing too old and too heavy to be moved by the likes of you." Elska, who had spent her life in a kennel that flooded every spring, looked at it out the window of the king's own carriage and felt the last of her defiance go quiet in her chest. They gave her rooms with a fire that someone else had lit. That, more than the height of the halls, was what undid her. She stood a long time in the middle of the floor, not touching anything, a Null in borrowed gray, waiting to be told it was a mistake. Instead, they told her she was to be presented to the court. The great hall, when they walked her into it that evening, held every high wolf of the 7 pack-lands, and every one of them had already heard. She felt it the moment the doors opened. The turn of 100 heads, the ripple of a word passed hand to hand behind gloves and cups. Null, the kennel girl, the mateless thing he found in the mud. She had been stared at her whole life. She had never been stared at like this, by people who mattered, in a silence sharpened to a point. Corvin was waiting at the dais, and when he saw her, his whole face did something warm and public and entirely false, and he came down the steps to take her hand, as though she were made of glass and gold rather than kennel rough and terrified. "Smile," he murmured, only for her. "You look like a woman being marched to a hanging." "I feel like one." "You mustn't. Hangings are dreadfully out of fashion this season." Then he turned them both to face the hall, and his voice changed, pitched now to carry to the farthest cold corner, the voice of a man who had never once been interrupted. "You've heard the talk," he told his court. "I'll give you the truth of it, and then I'll hear no more." And Elska stood there while the Alpha King of the 7 pack-lands told a beautiful, seamless, outrageous lie. A Null, he said, was not an empty wolf. The elders in their hill packs had forgotten the old lore, but he had not. A Null was a wolf whose thread the moon had turned inward. Hidden, sealed, kept dark against the day the one it was cut for came near enough to draw it out. No elder in Thornfell had read a bond on Elska because no elder in Thornfell was ever meant to. "I read it," Corvin said, "because it is mine. She has been sealed my whole life, and hidden, and kept. And I have crossed 7 pack-lands to open her." He lifted her hand and pressed his mouth to her mud-remembering knuckles, and the hall made a sound like the sea. "Doubt her again," he said mildly into the noise, "and you doubt me." It was, Elska thought with a kind of horror, perfect, unanswerable. No one could disprove a bond only he could feel. In a single sentence he had turned 6 winters of trash into destiny, and locked her inside it so cleanly that to deny it now was to call the king a liar in his own hall, a thing that got wolves killed. They cheered. Gods help her, they cheered. She watched their faces as they did it and learned something she would need later. Not one of them believed him. They cheered because he was the king, and the king had told them what the truth would be. And in Hymir that was the same thing as the truth. She had thought power meant being obeyed. She was beginning to see it meant being agreed with, which was worse, and far more dangerous, and left a person very much alone at the top of it. He did not let her speak to him alone until the doors had shut behind the last of them, and the hall was only theirs, and the guttering torches. She rounded on him then. "There's no bond," she said. "You know there's no bond. I felt nothing when you knelt, and I feel nothing now. What are you doing?" He had gone to the wine, and he did not turn around at once. "Do you always argue with a gift?" "A gift." She laughed, and it came out cracked. "You've made me a fraud in front of the whole realm. When they find out, and they will, it won't be you they hang. They won't find out." "Why?" The word tore out of her. "Look at me. I am the least likely queen in the history of the 7 pack-lands, and you crossed all of them to kneel in a mudyard and pick me. Men don't do that for nothing. Kings don't. So tell me the truth, or send me back to my dogs. But do not stand there and pour wine and tell me the moon hid me for you." For a moment, just a moment, the easy mask slipped, and underneath it she saw something tired and sharp and calculating that made her go cold. Then it was gone, smoothed back into charm. "Get some sleep, Elska," he said gently. "You've had a long road." She went, but at the door she stopped, because a small thing had been nagging at her since the mudyard and had only now come loose. "The bearing," she said slowly. "Thornfell's right. It falls on a different day every year. The elders set it by the moon, not the calendar. No one outside the pack could know when it would be." She turned. So how did a king on a chance ride down from the hills happen to arrive at my gate on the one morning of the year I'd be standing bared in that yard for anyone to see? Corvin said nothing. And that, Elska understood, watching his silence, was the first thing that did not add up. She had a feeling it would not be the last. She had expected, in the days that followed, to be summoned to more halls and made to smile at more strangers. Instead, on the third morning, a page brought her down and down through Highmere by stairs she hadn't known existed, out a low door, and into the royal mews. She stopped on the threshold and, for the first time since the mud, forgot to be afraid. They were beautiful. Not the hawks, though those were fine. The hounds. 20 couple of them in clean straw, deep-chested hunting wolves, bred long and lean, and they came to the bars in a warm wave the instant they scented her, and Elska was on her knees in an instant with her hands full of ears and lolling tongues, and did not care in the slightest what that looked like. "I'm told," said Corvin from the doorway, "you have a gift with them. You had me followed. I had you researched. It's different, it's much more flattering." He came in and leaned against a post, watching her be swarmed. He'd left off the coat and the rings. In shirt sleeves, at ease, he looked less like the man who'd owned the great hall, and more like the one who'd knelt in the mud. She distrusted that man far more. "The packmaster says the runt you left in Thornfell would have died a week ago in any other hands. You sat up 4 nights with it." "It's a dog. You sit up with it." She scratched a gray bitch under the jaw. "That's not a gift. That's just not being cruel. People confuse the two because the second one's rarer." He laughed. A real one. Surprised out of him. Quite different from the polished sound he made in company. She filed the difference away with everything else she was collecting about him and told herself it was strategy. "Why here?" she asked. "Why show me this?" "Because you looked at Hymir like it might bite you, and I wanted to show you one room in it that wouldn't." He crouched to her level, careful, the way a clever man approaches a thing that might run. The gray bitch left Elska's hands to shove her long head under the king's palm, and he took the weight of it without flinching, scratched behind the torn ear like a man who'd done it before. "And because I wanted to talk to you somewhere you weren't braced to be humiliated." "They like you," Elska said, and could not keep the accusation out of it. "The hounds. They don't like anyone who lies to them. It's the one thing they're never wrong about." "Then perhaps I don't lie to them." He met her eyes over the bitch's head. "Perhaps they're simply the only ones I've nothing to gain from. You'd know all about that. Being honest with creatures and armored with people. We're more alike than you'd care to be told." Elska of nowhere. "I'm always braced to be humiliated. It's very restful. You should try it." She kept her eyes on the hound. "You still haven't answered anything, you know. Hymir is full of rooms and none of them tell me why I'm in them. Ask me something small then. Save the large ones for when you trust me." "I'll never trust you." "I know." He said it without offense, almost fondly. "It's my favorite thing about you. Everyone here has trusted me since the day I was born, and not one of them means it. You won't, and I believe you completely." That's a terrible thing to build a marriage on. Most marriages in this hall are built on far less. At least ours would have a foundation of honest loathing. He tipped his head. "Do you know, you're the only person in 3 years to tell me I'm short, wrong, and cruel. All before breakfast, and mean every word. My counsel would sooner swallow their own tongues. I find it restful." "I aim to soothe," she said, and he laughed again, and she hated how easy it was becoming to make him do that. She looked up at that, and made her mistake. She looked at him too long. He was watching her with an attention she had no defense against, because it was the one thing 6 winters had never taught her to withstand. Cruelty she could stand in her sleep. This, being looked at, being found worth the looking, went through her armor like it wasn't there. Don't, she said. Don't what? Look at me like there's something to see. The old wound spoke before she could stop it, flat and ugly and true. I know what I am. The moon read me 3 times and turned its face away 3 times. Whatever game you're playing, don't play the one where you pretend a man like you could want a thing like me. That one I can't. Her voice did something humiliating. She stopped it. That one's cheap. I've had it played before. The muse went quiet. Even the hounds had gone still. Corvin didn't reach for her. She'd have hated him if he had. Instead he said, low and without a scrap of his usual polish, "The moon turned its face away from you." Yes. And I have spent my whole life being told the moon smiled on me. And I promise you, Elska, from the inside those 2 things feel exactly the same. Being chosen and being cursed. You end up just as alone. She had no answer to that. It had gone in under the armor before she'd seen it coming, and it warmed her. And that was the danger. That was the whole danger. Because a thing that could warm her could be used to. She got to her feet. She put the bars between them, and the hounds, and a hard, deliberate breath. That was a very good answer, she said. I've noticed you're full of them. A woman would want to be careful, wouldn't she, of a man who always has exactly the right thing to say. She left him there in the straw, and she did not let herself look back to see whether the wounded thing in his face was real, because she had already caught herself hoping it was, and hope, she knew better than anyone alive, was the most expensive thing a null could buy. It crept up on her, the way warmth creeps into cold hands. So gradually that by the time she noticed, the damage was done. 3 weeks she lived in Hymir, and 3 weeks she watched Corvin the way she'd watch a river she meant to cross, for the current under the calm. It was the sensible response to a man who couldn't keep a season without someone trying to poison him. She meant to learn his secret and keep her heart in its box while she did it. The king did not cooperate. He answered her sharp questions with jokes, and her silences with worse jokes. He appeared at the Muse at odd hours with cold hands and hot arguments about nothing. He learned that she took her bread torn, not cut, and after that it came torn, and he never once mentioned it, which was somehow worse than if he had. She'd brace for the cheap flattery she'd warned him off, and instead he'd tell her she was wrong about something and mean it, and argue her to a standstill and enjoy losing, and she'd lie awake in the dark and be furious to find him already in her head. And worst of all, somewhere in those 3 blurred weeks, she stopped wanting him to be lying. She noticed it the night she caught herself defending him. Not aloud. In her own mind, to her own suspicion, which had said he's using you and been answered before she could stop it. By for what, though? He could have any wolf in the realm. Why this elaborate cruelty if cruelty's all it is? That was the moment she knew she was in trouble. You did not build a case for a man you were trying to escape. She tried to unbuild it. She made herself a list, each cold morning, of everything she could not trust about him, and every evening he'd say some plain, unguarded thing that belonged on no list at all, and she'd have to start it over. He told her once, when she asked why he never seemed tired, that he'd been 19 when the crown came to him and had wept at his own coronation from sheer terror, and learned to smile so no one would ever see him do it again. He hadn't said it to charm her. It was simply the answer, and he'd looked annoyed with himself the moment it was out. Charm she could have armored against. It was the unpolished truths that undid her, dropped between them like coins he hadn't meant to spend. Then came the naming feast for House Rethmar, and everything changed at once. She had learned by then how to stand at Corvin's side and let the court flow past her. And she'd learned too that her null senses, the thing every elder had called an emptiness, were in truth a kind of terrible clarity. Where a bonded wolf's nose was full of their own thread and their mates, hers was full of everything, unclouded. And in 3 weeks she'd begun to read the court by scent the way she read the hounds. Fear under the perfume, appetite under the courtesy, the small sour reek of a lie. Which was how, standing in the Rethmar hall, she came to be looking at Lady Sabeth of House Rethmar, jewel of the season, whose devotion to her lord husband was the toast of every ballad. And to feel the hair rise slowly all along her arms, because the bond between Lady Sabeth and her lord, the famous perfect bond the whole court sighed over, was wrong. Elska knew a mate thread now. She'd spent 3 weeks pretending to carry one. A true bond smelled woven, grown, 2 scents grown through each other like roots. This one smelled stitched, applied. A thread laid over the top of 2 wolves who did not, underneath it, belong to each other at all. So cunningly done that a nose full of its own bond would never catch it. But Elska's nose was empty. Elska's nose caught everything. Someone had forged a bond. She stood very still and made herself breathe it in again to be sure, past the wine and the candle smoke and the crush of bodies. And there it was. The faint wrongness of a seam, a scent laid on rather than grown. She thought of the hounds, of the once a season a shepherd tried to foist a strange lamb on a grieving ewe by draping it in the dead one's skin. How the ewe took it every time, because a mother's grief-blind nose read only the wool and never the lamb beneath. The whole court was that ewe. Every bonded nose in the realm, blind in exactly the place a liar would want them blind. And if they could forge one, they could forge any. A loyalty, an alliance, an heir's claim, a reason to be standing at the king's right hand with a smile and a cup. The floor seemed to tilt. She understood all at once and completely what she was. Not a queen, not a fraud, a hound. The one nose in the 7 packlands that could smell the rot no bonded wolf could. Brought to Highmere, dressed in a lie about sealed threads, and set loose in a poisoned court to point at what the king couldn't see himself. That's why. That was the whole of why. She turned to find him, to say it, to throw it in his face, to make him admit it. And Corvin was already watching her from across the hall. Not the way he watched her in the mews. This was the other look, the one from the torchlit hall the first night. Sharp, tired, satisfied. The look of a man watching a tool do exactly the work he'd bought it for. Their eyes held. And Elska, sick to her stomach, understood that he knew that she knew. But that was not the worst thing that happened in the Rethmar hall. The worst thing was that when she tore her gaze from the king, she found someone else already looking at her. Lady Sabeth herself. Across the crowd, her painted smile quite gone. She had followed the line of Elska's stare from the forged bond to the king and back, and understood every step of it. And she was looking at the mateless queen now the way you look at a lit fuse, with the swift, cold arithmetic of someone deciding exactly how much time she had to put it out. She did not go to bed that night. She went to him. She found the king in his study with the fire burned low and a map of the 7 packlands spread under his hands, and she shut the door and set her back against it and said, "No more. I want the truth. All of it. And I want it now. Or I walk back to Thornfell tonight and you can find another nose." Corvin looked up. For a long moment he weighed her the way he weighed everything. Then, to her surprise, he set down the pen and the mask. The easy, glittering, exhausting mask simply came off, the way a man takes off armor at the end of a long day, and what was under it was so much older and more tired than the face the court knew that her anger faltered. "You already have most of it," he said quietly. "You worked it out in the Rethmar hall. Someone is forging bonds. Not one, dozens over years all through the high houses. A forged loyalty bond makes a traitor smell like a friend. A forged mate bond puts a stranger's blood 1 marriage from a throne. The whole realm is held together by what our noses tell us, Elska, and someone has learned to make our noses lie." He rubbed his face. "I've known for 2 years. I have not been able to prove a single case, because every wolf I'd set to catch it is bonded, and every bonded wolf is blind exactly where I need them to see. And then you heard there was a null in a hill pack, she said. And then I heard there was a null in a hill pack. He didn't flinch from it. Yes, I set the bearings, date watched. I came myself because I could trust no one with the errand. I meant to find a weapon and dress her as a bride so no one would think to wonder why the king kept her close. His mouth twisted. That is the ugly truth of it, and you may hate me for it, and you would be right. I do hate you for it. I know. He held her eyes. What I did not plan for, what I could not have planned for, because I did not believe such a thing was in me anymore, was to want the woman and not the weapon. I meant to use you, Elska. I have stopped being able to, and I have no idea when it stopped. Only that it has, and that it is the single most inconvenient thing that has happened to me since the crown. The fire ticked. Outside, wind moved against the old stones. She should have left. Every armored, sensible thing in her said leave, that this was only another perfect answer from a man who had a perfect answer for everything. But the mask was still off. She had spent 3 weeks learning his face, and she knew now the difference between the polished thing and the true one. And this was the true one, tired and cornered and looking at her as though she were the last honest thing in a house full of lies. You performed a whole kingdom since you were 19, she said. How do I know this isn't a performance too? You don't. He rose, came round the desk, stopped an arm's length from her. Close enough that she could have stepped back, and didn't. That's the horror of loving a liar, isn't it? You never get to be sure. All I can tell you is that with everyone else in my life, I choose the face. With you, I've run out of the strength too. Believe that or don't. But don't tell me you can't smell whether I'm lying, Elska, because we both know it's the one thing you've never once got wrong. That's not fair, she said, using the one true thing about me to sell me the rest. No, he agreed. It isn't. I've never once been fair to you, and I don't expect to start being able to afford it. I'm a king. Fairness is a luxury for wolves with less to lose. His voice dropped. But I am not lying to you now. Smell me and tell me I am. And that was the trouble, because she could smell him. Fear and exhaustion and want. Want most of all, plain and helpless and aimed at her, with not a thread of the sour reek of a lie anywhere in it. She kissed him, or he kissed her. Afterward, she could never fairly say which, only that the distance between them was there, and then it was not, and his hands came up to frame her face like she was something that might be taken from him, and every careful, armored, 6 winter-cold thing in her went to white silence at the warmth of his mouth. There was no court to perform for. No hall, no lie, no watching eyes. Only the low fire and his hands, and the astonishing fact of being wanted by a man who had run clean out of masks to hide it behind. She had been touched in her life the way you touch a tool. For use. For work. She had never once stood in the path of a wanting like this, aimed at her and nothing else, and it folded her resistance in half. She fisted a hand in his collar and kept him there, close, her forehead coming to rest against his, both of them breathing like they'd run a long way to arrive at exactly this. And in that moment, in the warmth and the firelight, with his heart slamming under her palm, something happened that she had been told her whole life could never happen to her. Deep under her own scent, in the sealed place the moon had turned inward, a thread stirred. Faint. New. Barely there. A single fiber of gold drawn taut between her ribs and his, so quiet a bonded wolf would never have felt it over the roar of their own. But Elska's whole life had been silence, and she felt this in the silence like a struck bell. A bond. Real. Beginning. Hers. forming toward him. The lie he'd told the whole court coming true in the firelight where no one could see it. She pulled back. She put a careful handspan of air between them, and she did not tell him. Because a thread could be pulled. Because the last time she'd let herself believe she was wanted, she'd been 12 and grateful, and it had cost her everything. Because hope, she'd told herself only weeks ago in the Muse, was the one thing a null could never afford. And she had just, without meaning to, spent all of it at once. "Good night, Your Majesty," she made herself say, and left him there by the low fire, walking back through the cold halls to her own rooms with one hand pressed over the new gold ache in her chest, terrified of the one thing 6 winters had never prepared her for, getting exactly what she wanted. The strike came 4 days later at the Packlords' Assembly, in front of half the realm. It was the great gathering of the year. Every high house of the 7 Packlands convened in Hymir's council hall to renew their bond oaths to the throne. The ancient rite where each lord came forward and let the king's nose confirm the loyalty thread that tied his house to the crown. It was, Elska understood now, the perfect ground for the forgers. A hall full of oaths no one could check, taken by a king whose nose they had learned to fool. She stood at Corvin's shoulder in blue, her new thread a secret ache under her ribs, and she did what she had been brought to do. She read the room. It was worse than she'd feared and better than she'd hoped, both at once. Most of the bonds were true, grown, woven, honest, the ordinary loyalties of ordinary wolves who had come a long, cold way to renew them. But scattered through the hall like rot through good timber were the others, the stitched wrongness, the applied seam, the forgery. She counted them the way she'd once counted sick hounds down a row, dread thickening with each, 4, then 6, then a 7th she almost missed because it was so beautifully done. 7 forged oaths, in the highest hall of the realm, sworn to a king who could not smell a single one. She marked each one with her eyes and said nothing, because Corvin had been right. To accuse them here, with no proof a bonded nose could confirm, was to be called a hysterical null and hanged for slandering great houses before she'd got past the second name. So she waited, and she watched the great rite grind on, lord after lord coming forward to bear a throat to the king, and she thought, any one of these could be the knife. She did not yet know how right she was, or how soon. Then Lord Halloran of the Western Reach came forward to renew his oath, and every hair on Elska's body stood up at once. His loyalty bond to the crown was forged. She'd have staked her life on it. But that was not what stopped her heart. What stopped her heart was the second scent under it, faint and bitter and green, that she knew from 6 winters of dosing sick hounds, the killing dose and the curing one lying, as every kennel hand learns to her cost, no more than a hair apart, wolfsbane, on his hand. On the oath cup he was raising toward the king's mouth, there was no time to be believed. There was only time to move. Elska knocked the cup from Corvin's hand half a breath before it reached his lips. It shattered on the flagstones, the green reek blooming up, and the hall erupted, lords surging back, guards surging in, Captain Ursa's blade clearing its sheath. And in the chaos, Lord Halloran did the one thing a truly loyal wolf would never have done. He ran. He didn't get far. Ursa's people had the doors, and they bore him down not 10 paces on, and Elska was already there, dropping to a crouch over him with her whole body singing that terrible clarity, because a man's scent tells the truth, his mouth never will, and she meant to have it. Fear, yes. Wolfsbane, yes. And under it, threaded through his cloak where he'd carried it close, a scent that did not belong to him at all. A scent of river mill and hill thyme and cold hearth smoke. A scent she knew. A scent she had grown up inside. Thornfell. He had been carrying something of Thornfell against his skin. She went through his cloak with shaking hands and found it. A token, A plain twist of miller's twine knotted in a pattern she had seen 10,000 times on grain sacks in a mill on the edge of the only village she'd ever known. The maker's mark of Marin's own family, the knot Marin tied without looking, the knot Marin had once idly tied into Elska's own hair on a summer afternoon 100 years ago, while telling her she was worth more than the whole rotten pack put together. She sat back on her heels with the twine in her palm and the hall roaring around her, and could not, for a moment, make her lungs work. It meant nothing, she told herself. Twine was twine. 100 mills tied 100 knots. But her nose had already told her the truth. Her mind was scrambling to outrun, because the token did not merely look like Thornfell, it smelled of a specific hearth and a specific hand. And there was only one hand in all the world that Elska's nose knew the way it knew its own. No, Elska said, to no one, to the twine, to the floor. Corvin's hand closed over her shoulder. Elska. His voice had gone very careful, the gentle one he used on frightened councilmen, the one he had never once used on her. Not here. Give it to me and say nothing. There is more to this than you know, and this is not the room to learn it in. There's more to this than I know? She rose, and the token bit into her fist. You knew. You've known. That's the gentle voice. That's the voice you use when you already have the answer, and you're deciding how much of it I can be trusted with. The hall was in uproar, lords shouting, guards dragging Halloran up, and none of it reached her. How long have you known this went through Thornfell? Come with me, Corvin said, and I'll tell you everything. I swear it. But not here. And Elska, with the miller's knot cutting a red line into her palm, and the new gold thread aching in her chest, and the whole bright hall tilting slowly sideways, understood that the worst morning of her life had just been dethroned. He took her to the study where the mask had come off. It did not come off this time. This time he stood with the map between them like a shield and told her the truth in the flat, exhausted voice of a man setting down a thing he'd carried too long, and every word of it took something from her she would not get back. The forgeries don't come from the great houses, he said. The great houses are only the buyers. Someone learned the old craft, bond forging, moon thieving, whatever you want to call it, and has been selling it. Selling loyalty that isn't real. Mates that aren't fated. Oaths that fool a king's own nose. For years. And every thread of it, when I finally traced it back, ran to the hillpacks. To one hillpack. To one house in it. He looked at her. Thornfell. The miller's family. I have been trying for a year to put a name to the wolf at the center of it. I had the mill. I had the family that ran it. What I lacked was which of them. Until I rode up into a hillpack and found the one wolf they'd raised on kindness instead of cruelty. A forger who meant to own a null would never leave her to the pack to break. She would keep her close and make herself the only warmth in a cold life. He looked at her. You have told me about that warmth a dozen times since you came to Hymir. You simply never told me it had a name. I worked the name out on my own, and I have prayed every day since that I was wrong. Don't. Her voice came out of her wrong. Don't you say it. Marin. The name went through her like the wolfsbane would have gone through him. No. She was shaking her head, and it wouldn't stop. No, you don't. You don't understand. She found me when I was 12 and crying in the straw, and no one. She was the only one who ever. She brought me bread when the hearths wouldn't. She called it cruelty when everyone else called it justice. She is the one good thing. She is the only good thing, and you... The accusation found its feet at last, and she seized it, because it was easier to bear than the other one. You used me. You knelt in the mud and lied to a whole kingdom and dressed me up as a bride to walk me through your poisoned court. And now the moment I'm no more use to you, you point at the one person who ever loved me and call her the monster. That's That's convenient, isn't it? That's very convenient. It is not convenient, Corvin said quietly. It is the least convenient thing I have ever had to tell a woman I love. Because I know what she is to you. I have watched you call her your one safe thing without ever once seeing what I saw, and I have been sick with how to tell you ever since. Then don't. Then you're wrong. Elska. He came round the map, and she backed away, and he stopped at once, the way he always stopped, the way she hated. Ask yourself one thing. Ask yourself who taught you that you were trash. She went still. You said the moon read you 3 times and turned away. But a null is not cursed. I've spent 2 years learning that a null is hidden, protected, rare and precious and dangerous to exactly the sort of wolf who forges bonds, because a null can see them do it. So who taught you it was a shame? Who sat in the straw with a frightened child and, year on year patient as anything, taught her she was worthless, that she had no one, that she must never leave, that the world beyond Thornfell had nothing for a thing like her? Who kept the one nose in the 7 packlands that could have ruined her buried in a kennel, grateful and small, and hers? The straw, the bread, the summer afternoon. You're mine first. 100 kindnesses, and under every one of them, laid on so cunningly no grateful child could ever have caught the seam. The same stitched wrongness she'd smelled on Lady Sabeth. A thing applied over the top of a wolf who did not, underneath it, belong to her at all. She had been the you. Her whole life, she had been the grieving you, and the wool had been love, and she had never once smelled the lamb beneath. And the worst of it, the thing that took her legs out from under her more surely than he used you ever could, was that she could hear it now, all of it, the whole architecture of herself built by another wolf's patient hands. You've no one but me, Elska. The world's got nothing for a thing like you. Don't hope, it only costs you. Stay small, stay safe, stay mine. 6 winters of it, so gentle she'd called it comfort. She had thought her self-loathing was the one honest thing she owned, the one true report from the moon itself. And it had been a lie, too. Someone had written it into her the way they wrote a forged thread onto a stranger, and she had worn it her whole life and called it her soul. I don't believe you, she whispered. But her voice had stopped being sure, and they both heard it. And that, the not being sure, the ground going out from under the one thing that had never been a lie, was the true bottom of it, lower than the mud, lower than trash, a floor she had not known was under her until she fell through it. Elska. His voice cracked on her name. I should have told you sooner. I was a coward about it. But I did not lie about the one thing that... You lied about all of it. She was at the door. The gold thread in her chest was screaming at her to turn round, to go to him, and she hated it, hated that even now her own newborn bond was a traitor. You made me a queen to make me a weapon. She made me a friend to make me a tool. The only difference between the two of you is that she got there first and she did it better, and neither one of you ever once wanted me. She wrenched the door open. I was wrong. In the muse. There isn't something to see. There never was. There's just a nose the two of you fought over. That's not... Good night, Your Majesty. She walked out into the dark of the corridor, and behind her she felt it, clear as scent, clear as the new gold thread she was trying so hard to strangle. The sound of a man realizing he had broken a thing that might never come back whole. She was halfway to nowhere, down some cold gallery she didn't know, going fast because moving felt like doing something, when a voice came out of the dark and stopped her heart. There you are. Gods, I've been half the castle looking. Elska, Elska, you're white as a corpse. What's happened? Maren. She stepped out of a doorway with her arms already opening, her clever face creased with exactly the worry it had always worn, and every cell in Elska's grief-blind body lunged toward the one safe thing before her mind could catch its own leash. And then her nose caught up. River mill. Hill thyme. Cold hearth smoke. The same scent she'd pulled off a poisoner's cloak not an hour before, threaded through with the stitched wrongness she had spent 3 weeks learning to name. Because Maren, standing here in Hymir she had no earthly business being in, wore a forged bond of her own, a loyalty thread laid over the top of her tying her to some house, some master, some purse. Elska had simply never smelled it before. You did not go looking for the seam in the one wolf you'd have died before doubting. Trust nobody, Maren had told her, in the tack room, on the worst morning of her life. If it goes bad, you send word and I will come. She had come. Of course she had come. She'd been here all along. Every instinct Elska owned screamed to name it, to strike, to weep. And she muzzled all of them, because a woman who has spent her life being underestimated learns the one weapon that never runs out. Letting them go on thinking you're a fool. He used me, Elska heard herself say, and let her voice break, which was not hard, because it was true. Maren. He used me. The whole thing was, he never... She let herself be gathered in, let the familiar arms close round her, and over Maren's shoulder her dry eyes went hard and clear as winter. You were right. You were right about all of it. I know. Maren stroked her hair, and her voice was warm as bread, warm as a summer afternoon, warm as the most patient lie ever told. Oh, I know, my love. Listen to me. There's still a way out of this, for both of us. But you have to be brave, and you have to trust me one last time. Here it came. Elska held still and let her fit the trap around her. The pack lords are still assembled, Maren murmured, frightened, wondering who tried to poison the king in their own hall. And the truth, Elska, the truth is, it was him. Corvin. He's been forging the bonds himself, culling the houses that won't kneel, and tonight he poisoned his own cup to blame a loyal lord and frighten the rest into obedience. I have proof, but it can't come from me. I'm a miller's daughter, they'll laugh. It has to come from someone they'll believe. Her hands framed Elska's face, tender, exactly as Corvin's had. It has to come from his queen. Walk in and tell them what he really is, and we walk out of this free, and I will take you home, and it will be you and me and the hounds, and none of them will ever touch you again. And there it was, the flaw, gleaming, because a liar who builds a world always leaves one seam. He poisoned his own cup. But the wolfsbane had been on Halloran's hand, in Halloran's oath cup, carried in a cloak that stank of thornfell and knotted with Maren's own family twine. Maren was telling her the poison was Corvin's, and Maren could only know how the poison had been delivered if Maren had delivered it. She had just described, cooing, a crime she was confessing to. Corvin had told the truth. Every word, even the one that had broken her. All right, Elska said softly, and let a tear fall, and it was real, only not for the reason Maren thought. Take me in. I'll tell them. The council hall was still full, still churning, half the realm's power packed in under the high cold vault, with the shards of the oath cup still on the flagstones. Corvin stood at the dais grave-faced, Ursa at his side. He saw Elska come through the doors with Maren's hand at her back, and Elska watched the last light go out of him. Watched him decide she had come to bury him, and she was sorry for that. She would be sorry for that for a long time, but there was no way to warn him without warning the room. Your queen has something to say, Maren called, bright and grieving, playing the loyal servant to the rafters. She's afraid, my lords, but the truth must be told, whatever it costs her. It will cost me nothing, Elska said, and stepped forward alone, and pitched her voice to carry the way a king had taught a kennel girl a voice could carry. Because I'm a gnoll, my lords. The moon turned its face from me, and every one of you has been taught that makes me nothing. But it doesn't make me nothing. It makes me the one wolf in this hall your forger could never fool. The room went still. You take your oaths by scent because scent cannot lie. Someone in these lands learned to make it lie. Forged bonds, false loyalty, false mates, sold to any house with the coin and the ambition. You can't smell them. I can. Right now. In this room. She turned, slow, and let them see her do it. Lord Halloran, whose cup I struck from your king's hand, his oath thread is forged, and I will swear it on the block. Lady Sabeth of Rethmar, forged, both of you, and I'll name 5 more before I'm done. Voices rose, outrage, fear, and she cut through them. And the wolf who sold every thread of it, the wolf who carried the poison up out of the hills, the wolf standing behind me right now wearing a loyalty she bought instead of grew. She turned the last of the way round and looked Marin in her clever, warm, emptying face. Her name is Marin of Thornfell, Elska said. Search her. She ties her house's knot without looking. You'll find it on the poisoner's cloak. You'll find it on everything. For one heartbeat the mask held. Then it dropped, all at once. And the warm, patient thing Elska had loved her whole life was simply gone. And what stood in its place had a blade already sliding down out of its sleeve, and it came at her, fast, because the quickest way out of a closing room is through the wolf who closed it. But Elska had spent 6 winters breaking up fights in a pit of 40 half-wild hounds, and there is no school on earth that teaches your body to read a lunge faster than that one. She was already moving. She caught the knife wrist as it came, turned into Marin's weight the way you turn into a bolting animal, and put her down hard on the cold flagstones with a knee in her back and the blade skittering away across the shards of the king's cup. She leaned down close to the ear that had told her, for 6 winters, exactly what she was worth. You taught me I was nothing, Elska said. Low, only for her. You should have remembered what nothing has to learn, just to stay alive. Then Ursa's people had her, and it was done, and the hall was roaring, and Elska stood up out of the wreck of her whole childhood with her hands not shaking at all. They took Marin away in irons, and Halloran, and before the night was out, 3 of the 5 Elska had promised to name, and the great council hall of Hymir learned in a single evening that every oath it had ever trusted might be a lie. Which was, Corvin said grimly, a catastrophe he would spend the next 10 years cleaning up, and infinitely better than the alternative, which was not knowing at all. By the gray hour before dawn, the interrogators had begun to map the shape of it. Not one forger, but a trade. A craft passed and sold, its ledger running back through Thornfell's mill to buyers in half the great houses, and at the center of the web, a miller's daughter who had understood before anyone that in a realm that governed itself by scent, the wolf who could counterfeit scent could counterfeit anything. A friend, a marriage, a claim, a crown. She had begun with a lonely null child because a lonely null child was the one flaw in her whole design, and she had chosen to own that flaw rather than kill it. It was, the interrogators agreed, the single most patient piece of treason any of them had ever seen. Elska did not go to watch. She had smelled enough truth for one lifetime. He found her afterward on a cold rampart with the wind cutting through her blue silk, looking out at the dark hills where Thornfell was, where a mill wheel she'd loved still turned for a family that had made a weapon of a lonely child. You saved my life, he said. Again. After everything He stopped. You could have walked in there and ended me. She'd handed you the knife. No one would ever have known it was a lie. I know. Then why? Because it was a lie. She didn't turn around. And I'm done being handed knives by people who tell me they love me. Both of you. All my life. Someone deciding what I am and dressing it up as a gift. Her voice was very steady, and that was the worst of it. She made me small so I'd be useful. You made me a queen so I'd be useful. I've been useful, Corvin. I've been so useful. I have been the most useful girl in the 7 Packlins. Now she turned, and her eyes were dry and terrible. Do you know what I keep thinking? That I grieved her. On the walk into that hall, with her hand on my back, part of me was already grieving her. The friend I thought I had. And I will have to go on grieving her for years. A person who never once existed. You can't even bury a thing like that. There's no body. There was never any body. Just a shape I loved that a clever wolf wore to keep me quiet. She drew a breath that shook. I would like, just once, to be wanted by someone who had nothing to gain from wanting me. And I've finally learned there's no such person. So I'm going to go and be no use to anyone at all, and it is going to be the first free thing I've ever done. The bond is real, he said, desperate, low. Elska, I know you feel it. I've felt it 4 days. The thing I lied about, it's true. It came true. You can't tell me you don't. I feel it. The gold thread was screaming. She held her face still against it by an act of will that cost more than anything she'd done in the hall. It doesn't matter that it's real. She was real too. The realest thing I ever had. Real isn't the same as safe, and it isn't the same as true. And I am so tired of learning that the hard way. She could see what it cost him to stand there and not reach for her. The same restraint he'd shown in the Muse, the stopping at once she'd once mistaken for kindness and now understood as only a cleverer kind of patience. Every wolf who had ever wanted her had wanted her for something: her nose, her silence, her use. Somewhere on the long walk out of that hall, she had decided she would rather be wanted by no one at all than spend 1 more year being useful and calling it love. She walked past him, close enough to touch, and touched nothing. You'll be a good king. You were always going to be. You just needed someone to see the rot for you. And now you have. And you don't need me anymore. That's the kindest thing I can tell you. You don't need me anymore. I never needed you, Corvin said, and his voice broke clean in half. I wanted you. From somewhere in the Muse. From before I had any right to. That was the whole disaster of it. But she was already gone, down the dark stair, one hand pressed flat over the newborn thread in her chest, as though she could hold it shut by main force. And behind her, alone on the rampart in the killing wind, the alpha king of the 7 Packlands did not perform anything at all, because for once in his life, there was no one there to see. She went back to the hounds. Not to Thornfell. She would never set foot in Thornfell again. And Thornfell, when the crown was through with it, would not much resemble the place that had named her trash, but to a stone gate lodge at the edge of the royal forest, half a day from Highmere, where the old king's hunt kennels had been left to fall down and where nobody at all had any use for her. She rebuilt them. She took the sick and the ruined dogs no one else would gentle, and the gray bitch from the Highmere Muse who had fretted herself thin after Elska left and been sent along in a basket by a Captain Yrsa who had no orders either way and was using her judgment, and the half-grown runt from Thornfell, full-grown now, enormous and devoted and useless at everything but love, who had somehow been waiting for her at the lodge the day she arrived, delivered by no one, explained by no one. She did not have to ask who. She pressed her face into his fur and did not cry, quite. And Corvin, being Corvin, laid his siege in the only language he had left. He wrote 2 and 3 letters a week in his own cramped hand, and she read every one and answered none. Some were affairs of state, as though her opinion on a grain tithe still mattered to the man who ran the world. Some were 3 lines long. I have discovered I dislike a court that no one is in to disapprove of me. It has made all the courtiers unbearably relaxed. Some ran for pages and said nothing and everything. One, near the bottom of a sheet she'd sworn not to finish, read, "You said I made you a queen to make you useful. You were right, and I would give the crown itself to unsay it. But you must let me tell you the one thing I got wrong that night, which is that I did not make you anything. You were already the bravest wolf in the 7 Packlands, standing in a mud yard with a sick dog and no reason left to be brave. I only rode a very long way to be near it. That is not use. That is the opposite of use. I do not have a better word for it, so I will simply keep sending it." She kept that one. She told herself it was to burn later. She did not burn it. The flowers came, and the cheeses, and once an entire cartload of the best kennel timber in the realm with no note at all, which undid her worse than any note could have. Captain Yrsa came in person twice, ostensibly about hound breeding, and reported the king's condition in the tone of a woman describing weather she disapproved of. "He works too much. He smiles at no one. It's very restful, and I hate it." Elska threw a boot at her. Yrsa caught it, examined it, and kept it. There was no one here to have an opinion about any of it. No chorus of friends to tell her to make him sweat, or to forgive him, or to read the letters back to her. That was the shape of the thing she'd chosen, quiet and free, and hers. And so silent some nights that she'd find herself talking to the gray bitch just to hear a voice that wasn't in a letter. She told herself she preferred it. A whole life of being told what she was, and now a place where nobody told her anything at all. And some nights, she even believed it. Right up until she lay down in the dark and felt the gold thread under her ribs turn its patient face toward Hymir, like a plant toward a window, and had to press her fist against it and breathe until it quieted. She was not, she was discovering, very good at being free. 5 months. And then the letters stopped. The last one was short. "You have been clear, and I have finally heard you, and I am ashamed it took me so long to give you the one thing I never offered. The sight of the door standing open, with no one leaning on it. I'll trouble you no more, Elska. Be free. Be no use to anyone. Gods know you've earned it. See." She read it standing in the cold kennel yard with the gray bitch leaning against her leg, and she thought, "This is what I wanted." And she waited to feel free, and instead, she felt the gold thread under her ribs. The one she'd spent 5 months trying to smother and never quite managed to pull once, hard, and then go slack. The way a thing goes slack when the wolf at the other end of it finally, gently, stops pulling. And she understood, far too late to be dignified about it, that she had made a terrible mistake. She saddled nothing. She simply ran, out the gate and down the forest road toward Hymir, half a day's ride, and she went on foot at a dead wolf lope because the thread was slack, and she could not bear it. Could not bear 1 more hour of the silence she'd spent her whole life inside, and had, in her towering stupidity, chosen again. She was 3 miles gone when she came round a bend in the road and nearly went down over him, Corvin, Alpha King of the 7 Packlands. Sitting in the mud at the edge of the king's own road in the last light. No horse, no guard, no crown, his fine coat ruined to the elbow, looking up at her with an expression of such complete undefended astonishment that for a moment neither of them could speak at all. "I was coming to say it in person," he said, "since the letters plainly weren't working. I had a very dignified speech. I've been practicing it for a mile." He looked down at himself, at the mud. "The horse threw me. I think it's a comment." "Get up," Elska said. Her voice was shaking. "Corvin, you're a king. Get up out of the mud." "No." He didn't move. And then, slowly, deliberately, watching her, He shifted from sitting to kneeling there in the muck of the road, the way he had knelt once in a Thornfell yard in front of a whole cruel pack. But there was no pack now, no court, no lie, no unfalsifiable claim, nothing at all between them but the cold and the coming dark, and a thread that had gone slack, and was, right now, beginning very faintly to draw tight again. "I've done this the wrong way round my whole life," he said, knelt for an audience, performed the man they needed. "I knelt for you the first time to make a hall believe a lie." He took a breath. "So let me do it once with no one watching and nothing to gain and every reason not to. Elska of nowhere. Mateless, motherless, bravest wolf I ever met. I don't need you. I have never needed you. I only want you. Want you until it's ridiculous. Want you with the crown off and the mask off and the horse gone and the mud getting into places I'd frankly rather not discuss." His voice cracked. "Marry me, not to make you a queen, not to make you anything, just to stop being half a mile from you for the rest of my life. I dare you." The thread pulled tight, and it was singing, and through it, for the first time letting it come, letting herself feel down the length of the thing she'd strangled for 5 months. She felt him. All of it. No mask, no angle, fear and hope, and 5 months of missing her that felt like a slow drowning, and under it, plain and enormous and utterly without artifice, the truth she'd smelled in the study and been too frightened to keep. He wanted her, not the nose, not the weapon. The mud-caked, kennel-rough, unwantable her. She had spent her whole life braced for the seam in every kindness, the stitched place where love turned out to be use. She stood in the road now, and breathed him in, and breathed again, deeper, the way she'd taught herself to catch out the whole poisoned court, searching him top to bottom for the lie. There wasn't one. There was no seam anywhere in him. Just a wet, cold, ridiculous king kneeling in a puddle, wanting her, all the way down, with nothing under it but more of the same. "Ask me again," she said, and her own voice broke, "when you're not sitting in a puddle." His whole ruined face cracked open into something so hopeful it hurt to look at. "Is that a—" "Ask me again tomorrow," she said, "when you've had a bath and found your horse and remembered you're a king. Ask me somewhere with a roof, and I'll—" She pressed her hand over the singing thread and let herself for the first time in her life want a thing out loud. Ask me again, and find out. It took him 9 days of asking, sober, roofed, and in every way a man could think of. Before, on an ordinary gray morning in the kennel yard with mud to his boots and no speech left in him, Elska looked at the man kneeling in her hound yard and said yes. They were married at Thornfell. She chose it on purpose. The same muster yard where they'd made her kneel, the same pack that had called her trash. Old Sedwin laid 2 shaking fingers to her throat and read her at last, and this time his face did not pinch. It went slack with wonder, because the thread was there now, real and grown and gold, woven so deep the old man wept to feel it. Not sealed, not hidden, earned. "Null," Corvin murmured as the bells rang and the great hound tried to eat the flowers. "Trash, the least likely queen in the history of the 7 Packlands." He kissed her mud-remembering knuckles. "I've never once been so glad to be so thoroughly right about anyone. You knelt in the mud for me. I'd kneel in worse. No taking it back now. You've made it real. And there's no unsaying a thread like this one. Why would I? I'm the one who told a king to get up out of the mud. Twice." And she kissed him, in the yard where she'd learned exactly what she was worth, in front of everyone who'd taught her wrong, and did not for a moment care who saw.